It's Chavov Marchesh. So we started Tanya a few weeks ago, and please tell people. I think people are interested in learning Tanya. We're starting from the beginning. The more people get in on the ground floor, the better it is. This is our fourth class, and every week I tell you that next week we're going to start the Tanya. Well, so I'm telling you now that next week we're going to start the Tanya. I don't know. We'll find out. At the end of the class, I'll let you know if it's serious or not serious. So I just want to say one more thing. Okay, we've had 3 classes so far. In the first class, I defined basically, of course, very basically, very generally, what Chassidus is. In the second class, I defined what Chabad Chassidus is. And in the third class, I discussed how the Alter Rebbe did it. What the Alter Rebbe did in order to create Chassidus Chabad. Those were the 3 classes that we had. Could you mind sitting in the second row, please? I want to add one more thing, which is very important. Very, very important. How do I say this? In my feeling, in my mind, on whatever level, this is a very, very important nekuda that I want to share. And I'm going to give you a hakdama, I'm going to give you a preface, an introduction. There is a Rambam, which is brought in a lot of Sfarim. A Rambam which is brought in a lot of Sfarim, that describes something very, something very profound and at the same time very, very simple. You have in Chumash, in Pashas Mishpatim, a pasuk which is very difficult to understand. The pasuk says that by Aseres Hadibris, by Matan Torah, Vayiru es Elokei Yisrael. Vayiru es Elokei Yisrael, in simple English, is they saw the God of Israel. That's the translation of the words. Vayiru es Elokei Yisrael, they saw the God of Israel. And then it says, V'tachas Raglov, underneath his feet was Kemaise Livnas Hasapid. There was a Maise, there was some kind of handiwork, something that was created. It's Livnas Hasapid. Livnas Hasapid means bricks of sapphire or white sapphire. There's a bunch of other ways of translating those words. And then it says, as a clear day is transparent, is see-through. This is the pasuk. And of course, everybody's trying to figure out what this means. And you get into the typical 2 camps, the camp of the Mekubalim and the camp of the non-Mekubalim. The Rambam officially is in the camp of the non-Mekubalim, and therefore he doesn't have Kabbalah as a tool to explain all of these words. And amongst the things that the Rambam said, which is so simple and so basic, the Rambam is a very pashat tazach, that what the Jewish people saw was what we call in our culture pshitus, the plainness of godliness. The God of Israel. So of course, the way he understands it is they didn't see the God of Israel. They saw a raya of the God of Israel, because Tachas Raglov, you have to understand how the Rambam explains the words Tachas Raglov, the idea that close to Elokus, Kemaisa Livnas Asabrach Etzem Shmayim Lotayah. But this is what the Rambam says. The meaning of seeing Elokus means to see a symptom of Elokus, because there's an Eibishter, there is, and what you see is transparency, is pshitas, there's no form. And then the Rambam adds the most important component. And the Rambam says, when you look at something that has any kind of a form, any kind of an image, you see it. When you look at something which is absolutely without any form, without any preconception, without any definition, you see yourself. Or in slightly other words, you conceive of it based on yourself. In other words, when you are relating to a tzir, to any kind of a form, your relationship with that form is based on who you are and based on what that form is. But if you relate to something that has no form, the entire relationship is based on you. You understand the point? You meet another human being. What is your sense of that person? Your sense of that person is a combination of who that person is and a combination of who you are. Because you're a judge. Another person meets that other human being, also is creating a sense of who that human being is based on who that other person is and based on who they are. They come away with different impressions, because part of the impression is not only what you're observing, part of the impression is also the observer. What if you're looking at something that has no preconception, has no definition? So then the entire definition is based on you. Because there's no other thing contributing to how you perceive it. So the Rambam says the Eibishter is pshitus. It has no form. So everybody sees in the Eibishter themselves. In other words, everybody sees in the Eibishter in their conception, based on their understanding, and based on their experience, and based on their level, and so forth and so on. This is more or less what the Rambam says. Why am I sharing this? What is the reason that I'm beginning this class with this insight? I'm sharing it because I want to make the following point. In relationship between people, there's all kinds of relationships, yeah? And one of the relationships is the relationship of Mashpia Makabel, a teacher and a student, a giver and a receiver. And there's many different categories of relationships. Some people teach ideas, some people teach skills, some people provide emotion, some people... all kinds of relationships. Every relationship is based on the combination of the two principles who are engaged in the relationship. Every Mashpia Makabel relationship involves not just the Makabel. It's not just the person you're trying to help. It inevitably and invariably involves the helper. Now, in certain fields, right, like in psychology, for example, it's supposed to be dispersonal. You're helping another person deal with their emotions and with their struggles and with their lives. You're not allowed to mix your life in. So they have all of these techniques, supposedly, that professionals are taught to separate themselves from their principal, from their patient. But it's not real. It's not true. It's impossible. Some people do it better. Some people don't do it as well. But if you go to a psychologist who has integrity, he helps you with integrity. You go to a psychologist who lacks integrity, may have gotten very good marks on his tests. There's no way that therapy is not going to have in it an aspect that reflects the fact that this person doesn't have integrity. And this is the reality. The only exception to that rule is the Eibishter. When the Eibishter relates to us, it's only us. It's not the Eibishter at all. Why? Because the Eibishter does not have a form, a definition, a leaning, a bias, a tendency that qualifies the way he relates to us. And the same is true of a Rebbe. This is what I want to get to. Right? Tzadikim daimim l'bayram. There's a Rebbe, and there's a Guterid, and there's a Tzadik, and there's a Chossid. There's a lot of types of people. A Rebbe is unique. To say that a Rebbe is unique is such an understatement, it's almost an insult. Everybody understands that a Rebbe is unique. I'm simply focusing on one aspect of this uniqueness of a Rebbe. And that is, no person can connect to another person without the connector being involved in the connection. Reuven meets Shimon, yeah. Rachel means Sarah. So even though the entire relationship is about Shimon, even though the entire relationship is about Sarah, who Rachel is and who Reuven is a part of the Yachas. A Rebbe has the ability to involve himself with other people, and while he's involved with the other people, who he is nothing. Or to say in different words, his mitzias is pure, it's transparent. So when you imprint yourself, so to speak, on the mind of the Rebbe, on the heart of the Rebbe, on the soul of the Rebbe, for the duration of time that you're imprinted on the Rebbe's awareness, there's only you. Because there's no bias, there's no netiyah, there's no form that qualifies that. Which is why Yechidus and having a relationship with the Rebbe is such a unique thing. Because in your relationship with the Rebbe, there is literally no Rebbe. There's no Rebbe, there's just you. And the reason in your relationship with the Rebbe, there's no Rebbe, there's just you, is because the Rebbe is completely mavura, totally clear, transparent, see-through. So when he relates to another person, for the period of time that he's involved with the other person, he is that other person. Like you all know the famous story with the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbe Marash was very ill. He was not a healthy man. And part of his illness was that he had a terrible problem with obesity. And it wasn't from eating. He didn't eat a lot. He ate very little. But he didn't process food. He had a terrible, he had a series of illnesses. And this is one of the sicknesses that he had. And he would perspire profusely. He would sweat impossibly. He would sweat nachanan. When the Rebbe had a night of Yechidus, during the night of Yechidus, he would change his sirtuk several times. During a night of Yechidus, he would change his kapota a few times. And when they removed the old kapota, put in the new kapota, it was so wet that it was a shalaf and schita. You couldn't, if you touched it on Shabbos and Yom Tov, you were squeezing it. There was so much perspiration. So somebody once asked the Rebbe Marash, what? You're sitting in your chair, you're talking to people. What is causing you to perspire? So the Rebbe Marash answered, this is brought in Fala Khan's Maisis. The Rebbe Marash answered, imagine that in an hour you got dressed and undressed 30 times or 40 times. You just put clothing on and took them off, put on another set of clothing. It's tiring. And it causes a person to perspire. He says, every person who walks into my cheder, I have to go out of myself, put myself into that person. When that person leaves my cheder, I have to go out of that person. And when the next person comes in, I have to invest myself in that person again. And I have to do this over and over and over again. And the Rebbe's lashon was the shtendika halbosha unafshata, the constant investing and divesting over and over again exhausts, and it causes the Rebbe to perspire. This is how the Rebbe Marash explained it. Now, when I was a child growing up, you should know I asked this to people. Every person I meet, I ask. When I was a kid, now you must remember, the last time I was in the Rebbe's cheder in Yechidus was in Tafshin Lamed Hey. I was 9.5. Now, 9.5 is not a baby. 9.5 is not a baby. I went in with my family. But that was the last time we were in Yechidus. And somebody told me that we were also lucky because most people didn't get Yechidus in Tafshin Lamed Daled already. But okay. Tafshin Lamed Hey before Pesach, I remember it. The Rebbe gave my sisters dollars for neshek. That's how we know it was Lamed Hey, not Lamed Daled, because neshek didn't exist in other than Lamed Daled. Okay, one of the family. And I remember that Yechidus Vegas. I remember standing in the Rebbe's room. But one of the things I always knew as a kid was that when a person walked into the Rebbe got up. Just a little bit. He lifted himself. And when you walked out, the Rebbe got up again. And I asked this to every person I know who's been in Yechidus. And some people tell me, of course. And some people say, Vos Haksta Chainik. What are you talking about? So I don't know whether the pshat is pasha, people didn't pay attention, or the pshat is that the Rebbe behaved by different people differently. But you have to remember, this is my gift of the Yankasa. I remember this from the time that people were still going into the Rebbe. In other words, it's not like I invented this as an adult. As a child, we knew, my brother and I knew this. And we always associated with this story with the Rebbe Marash, which my father told us. And on Motzei Shabbos, he read from Frola Khan Sefer, that when the chassid goes into the Rebbe puts himself into that chassid. When the chassid leaves, the Rebbe goes out, the chassid goes into the next person. So there are people who tell me, it's very clear in their memory how the Rebbe would get up for them. Other people say, what are you talking about? I would like to believe, what I was told as a child, that every person who walked into the Rebbe, the Rebbe got up. A guy said to me, I was 14 years old. It was the year after his bar mitzvah. And they say there was, from after bar mitzvah, he went to the Rebbe alone. He says, you know how it felt? I walked into the Rebbe and the Rebbe gets up. He lifted himself off the seat for a drop. And as kids, we were taught that the significance of this was that the Rebbe is going into you. And when you would leave the Rebbe's room, he would stand up again, even if the Yechidus lasted 10 seconds. So, I'm not telling you facts. I'm telling you musings, you understand? I'm describing to you what I'm trying to collect from people who are old enough and attentive enough to remember Yechidus, and I get contradictions, constantly. And even from people who were very Siddish, who paid attention to Kol Prat. And they also tell me, it's not true, I'm imagining it never happened. But anyway, but the Indian is Zichar Azay. The Rebbe Marash said this, that Yechidus, you go into a person, and you come out of a person. Now, Lamai Naftir, what is the point of this introduction? The point of this introduction is that only a Rebbe can talk to you, and it's only about you. Any other relationship, a person relates to another human being, the relationship is also about the mashpia. I had a younger man years ago who wrote me a letter, like a chassid writes a letter to a Rebbe. And he gives it to me, a true story. And he says to me, Hezachaim, it's after Gimel Tammuz, you're my mashpia. I want you to read the ganze Emes Vegemir. I said, I handed it back to him. I wasn't going to read his personal confessions for many reasons, including the fact that I didn't need the nisyonis of his Yetzer Hara, Chamanegani Yetzer Hara. But I said to him, you need to understand Only a Rebbe could do this. There's no substitute for this. Yechidus works because there's a Rebbe. Now the Chassid can be on whatever level, but that's what Yechidus is. Yechidus is a mirror of you. But it's not a mirror that simply shows you. It's a mirror that actually directs you. But the mirror that's direct, in other words, tells you what to do and tells you where to go and tells you how to do. But it's directing you based entirely on you. Only a Rebbe can do this. Even a tzaddik can't do this. Because everybody has some flavor, some aspect of imperfection, inexactitude. And they give it, it's part of what they give to another human being. And this is how you have to understand the Tanya. The Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya. The Tanya is not at all a reflection of the Alter Rebbe. It's a reflection of the Alter Rebbe's Chasidim. The Alter Rebbe wrote a Sefer. And in this Sefer, the Alter Rebbe himself is entirely there, of course. Anon, Nafshi, Ksavas, Yehovas, Bechlal, we say about Tzvarim. The Chazal say every Chiddush of Torah belongs to the Machadesh, and whenever people learn, you repeat Hillel's Torah, Hillel speaks with you in the grave, and so on. But when I say that none of the Alter Rebbe is in the Sefer, none of who the Alter Rebbe is, as a Oivid, as a personal servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in the Sefer, all there is how the Alter Rebbe is there for you. So the Sefer reflects you, not him, at all. Ukiyadu Asipur, there's the story that's well known, that the Alter Rebbe wrote a Sefer Shal Tzadikim, and it's in the Rebbe's Rishimis, by the way. In other words, it's a true story. It's not maybe a true story, it's an absolutely true story. In the Rebbe's Rishimis, the very first lines of the Rebbe's Rishimis on Tanya is this Sipur, the very beginning. That the Alter Rebbe wrote a Sefer Shal Tzadikim. Now could you imagine a Sefer Shal Tzadikim? Could you imagine a Sefer Shal Tzadikim? Could you imagine a Sefer Shal Tzadikim? Do we learn Sefer Shal Beinanim, yeah? Imagine a Sefer Shal Tzadikim. The Alter Rebbe wrote a Sefer Shal Tzadikim. And he showed it to the Shpala Zaydi. The Alter Rebbe and the Shpala Zaydi were very close. They're very close. The Alter Rebbe had people who was unusually close to. The Alter Rebbe said that the people who were Yedidei Nefesh, the closest to him, were the Bzusha Hanepal and the Leib Kain, who wrote the Haskama, the written approbations on the Sefer Tanya Kadisha. But he had other people he was very close to. One of the people to whom the Alter Rebbe was very close was the Shpala Zaydi. This Kama Vakama Sipurim, as Alter Rebbe was passing through Shpala, and the Shpala Zayda swept the floor of the Beis Medrash with his beard. And he said, the Torah is coming to Shpala. Shpala had a great derech for the Alter Rebbe. He was much older than the Alter Rebbe. In the Rishimis of the Rebbe, it says that the reason he was called Zayda is because he became a Rebbe at a very old age. There's all kinds of other stories. But in the Rishimis of the Rebbe, it says he became a Rebbe. He was called Zayda because he was a Nistir until he was very old. He became a Rebbe at a very old age, and therefore he was called the Zayda of Shpala. But the Alter Rebbe showed him the Sefer Shal Tzadikim. And the Shpala Zayda said to the Alter Rebbe, the world is not a keli for this Sefer, and it needs to be burnt. And he added, I pray, I wish, I hope that my neshama should be Eila B'Sa'ara Hashamayma with the Oshan of this Sefer. I wish that when my neshama leaves this world, it should ascend to heaven with the smoke of this burning Sefer. And that's exactly what happened. The story happened in Tokuf Samach Zayin, like this. And in Tokuf Ayin, a few years later, there was a Sreifa in Liadi, where the Alter Rebbe lived, and Ksavim were destroyed, were burned, amongst them the Sefer Shal Tzadikim. And at the exact moment that the Sefer Shal Tzadikim was burning, the Shpala Zayda's Neshama left this world. So Sefer Shal Tzadikim was the Alter Rebbe speaking to Tzadikim. And this may come as a surprise to you, but just like in the Sefer Shal Beinanim, there's none of the Alter Rebbe, there's just the Beinani. Believe it or not, in the Sefer Shal Tzadikim, there's also none of the Alter Rebbe. There's just a Tzadik. Because just as far away as the Alter Rebbe is from Madregas Beinani, the Alter Rebbe is far away from Madregas Tzadik. The Rebbe is a Nossi. It's another thing altogether. And that's why the Tanya is such an amazing Sefer. It's Torah, it's Emes, written by a person whose Metzias is Torah. In other words, Chachmas Yishal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it speaks to us. That's what's the Tanya. The Tanya, the Sefer Shal Beinanim. That's why it's so special. This is a very fundamental insight into how you approach the Sefer Tanya Kaddish. Now, to speak in plain English, I'm speaking now in codes. I'm sounding like a Chassidish Yid who wants to sound like everything's very holy, right? I'm scoring points as a as someone who's making the Rebbe look great, which is of course one of Lubavitcher Chassidim's favorite activities. Let me tell you in plain English, in simple words. The Tanya is about Yetzer Hara. That's what Tanya is about. The Alter Rebbe had no shaykhs whatsoever to Yetzer Hara. None. But the Alter Rebbe not only tolerates the Yetzer Hara, in other words, not only he accepts the fact that there's people of Yetzer Hara, the whole design of the Sefer Tanya Kadisha revolves around the reality of the Yetzer Hara, of the Nefesh Habamis. Because in the Tanya, written by the Alter Rebbe, there's us and not him. Now, us means Beinani, which is also not exactly us, right? We have other labels for ourselves, like Baal Tshuva, and there are a couple of others which we're not going to share in public. But the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya B'Sefer Shel Beinani, because Beinani is not only about who a person is, a Beinani is about who a person could become. And a Beinani has a Yetzer Hara, and we all have a connection to Beinani because we have a Yetzer Hara, and theoretically, principally, a Yid is a Shayr. We could be Beinanim. Halavai Beinani, we could be Beinanim. And this is how the Tanya was written. Which is very, very, very special. The Alter Rebbe, a person who has no shaykhs whatsoever to these inyanim, is writing a sefer with a full understanding of what a Beinani is, and telling a Beinani what a Beinani could become. It's a sefer of emes. The only way to say the emes, as they say in the culture, is to be objective. And it's emes of Torah, it's objective, but it's objectively about somebody other than the one who's mechaber the sefer. It's about us. It's about our Yetzer Hara. Which is why the Tanya is such a realistic sefer. In other words, what I'm trying to say is it's both true and personal. Personal and true usually don't go in the same sentence. If it's personal, it isn't true. If it's true, it isn't personal. The Tanya is true. It's Torah, it's God's wisdom. There's no bias over here. There's no netiyas over here. And at the same time, it's incredibly personal. Because that's what a Rebbe does in every Yechidus. It's the truth that's yours. The Tanya is of Sefer, which people are learning from the times of Alter Rebbe till Mashiach comes and beyond, which speaks the emes, and at the same time it's an emes which every person relates to because it's that person's emes. It's his emes, it's her emes, it's my emes, it's your emes. That's what makes the Tanya so amazing. And when you learn the Tanya, what do you learn? You learn that if you are a Beinani, and you have a Yetzer Hara, and you want to be a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you want to be a Yid, you want to be a Mensch, you have to include in the way you think the Yetzer Hara. You have to include in how you approach your daily life the fact that you have a Yetzer Hara. And if you don't include in your daily life the fact that you have a Yetzer Hara, you will not succeed as an Eved Elokim. It's not going to work. This is the very basis of the Tanya. The Yetzer Hara is part of everything you do. And when you are honest, that's the key word, when you're honest about admitting that you have a Yetzer Hara, and you approach your life using the Yetzer Hara in Avodas Hashem, on one level you're fighting with the Yetzer Hara. On another level you're harnessing the Yetzer Hara's extra energy. The Yetzer Hara has more energy, has more passion, more fire than the Yetzer Tov, and you incorporate this into your Avodas Hashem, then a person succeeds. And that's really why the Tanya is so incredible. The Tanya speaks to the Yetzer Hara, speaks to my Yetzer Hara, to your Yetzer Hara, and our Yetzer Hara, and says your life as a person begins only when you include the Yetzer Hara in your Avodah, and it's not only accepting the limitations that the Yetzer Hara imposes on you, it's teaching you how you use the Yetzer Hara to be able to serve the Eibishter in a constructive way. This is very, very unique to the Tanya. Okay? Now, I'm a bit uncomfortable to say what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it. Because I think it's true. I don't know if it's true, but I think it's true. You have other Chassidus, different kinds of Chassidus. They have a very different approach. Without saying any names, there's a Chassidus which is based very, very heavily on Emunah. The whole Chassidus is Emunah, belief. Faith is an unbelievable thing. But if there's anything that the Alter Rebbe was concerned about, was what we call Ganva Pumachsata Rachamanakaya, believing in the Eibishter, and it doesn't translate into living as a Jew. So in another Chassidus, where everything is faith, they say you have a Yetzer Hara, believe that the Eibishter is with you, and Yetzer Hara won't bother you. You have an Nisayan, believe that the Eibishter is with you. Is it true? Of course it's true. If you have Emunah. But what kind of Emunah? Emunah that's stronger than the Yetzer Hara. Emunah that's stronger than temptation, emunah that's stronger than worry, emunah that's stronger than fear. If you have emunah that's stronger than all those things, emunah can carry you through life. And there are tzaddikim who live their entire life on emunah. The Rebbe used to bring a Torah from Baal Shem Tov. It's a famous Torah from Baal Shem Tov. It's famous because the Rebbe made it famous that the Degel Machne Ephraim, the Sidlikov, he was Baal Shem Tov's grandson. Baal Shem Tov had two famous grandsons. The Degel Machne Ephraim had many grandchildren, but this is two famous ones. The Degel Machne Ephraim and the Baruch of Mezhebush. The difference was that the Degel Machne Ephraim learned by the Baal Shem Tov. He knew him personally. The Baruch was born after Baal Shem Tov's Estaltus. And the Degel Machne Ephraim brings a Torah named the Baal Shem Tov. You heard it from the Baal Shem Tov. That it says in Pashas by Yishlach that Yankov Avinu tells the Eibush Yankov is humble in front of God. Ki b'makli avarti es hayardein hazeh. Across the Yarden b'makli. Right? So you know Mistama Mikam Mecha B'Kelam Hashem is the gematria is atheist b'makli. So the Degel Machne Ephraim gesagt that the Baal Shem Tov touched. The Baal Shem Tov said about himself, Pa Machas, once I walked across the surface of water be'emuna pshuta lavad v'li shum shem. I walked across a body of water just with emuna, without any names of the Eibishter. In other words, he didn't use Kabbalah. He just believed the idea that lavaya ha'aretzum loya, that every single second the Eibishter is mahava machayim makayim, everything, and that the Eibishter wants, that the Eibishter will carry me across the body of water, even though water is a substance in which a person sinks, and he walked across the body of water. Now, I would advise you not to try that. Just simple advice. Or if you do it in a baby pool, you understand? Why? Because maybe halfway across, you lose your emunah, you understand? Somebody in the Kazakh. But emunah b'levad, b'li shum shem, is an avodah for Baal Shem Tov. Anoshim ke'arkeinu, it's not real. And this is what Chassidus Chabad is. Chassidus Chabad revolves around the Tanya. Chassidus Chabad, any person who's learned Chassidus Chabad knows how rich it is and how uplifting it is. And Chassidus Chabad is unbelievably rich and unbelievably uplifting and unbelievably spiritual. But at the heart of the Chassidus Chabad is the Tanya. And the Tanya is very different than the Maimorim that support it, because in the Tanya you have, in every word, amongst other things, Yetzer Hara. Because the Tanya is talking to us. And the Tanya says that for a person like you and me to have a connection to Chassidus, the Yetzer Hara must be a part of it. Because if the Yetzer Hara is not a part of it, we'll self-destruct. It will not work. And this is something which is very, very important in the Tanya. A person wants to have Chassidus. What's Chassidus? Chassidus is Emunah. Chassidus is Simcha. Chassidus is a relationship with Hashem Yisbarach, which does not come through the mind, has nothing to do with the ego, has everything to do with the neshama, like we discussed a couple of weeks ago. But you want to be a chassid, which means you want that what chassidus is should permeate who you are. If you want what chassidus is to permeate who you are, you have to include you in the chassidish journey. And you is the Yetzer Hara, and the Nefesh Bahamis, and weaknesses, and fears, and paranoia, and grudges, and all the other midas rois, which limit us and inhibit us, that we're so ashamed of, and we're so disgusted by, but they're absolutely who we are. When we incorporate all of those things and we begin to work a little bit on refining who we are, our behavior, in other words, we start being honest about our own limitations, our own inhibitions, and our own medidas v'agbalas, we create a framework for Chassidus. Maybe not big Chassidim, but little Chassidim, but truly Chassidim. You know, the Frierdiker Rebbe tells a story that he was a kid of 6 or 7, and he boasted to some ältere Chassidim, to Größer Chassidim, that there was a Fabrengen in Kharkov. It's one of those famous Fabrengens. I talk about this many times. In the Rishimas Amai said that for me. That the Rebbe Rayatz, the Frierdiker Rebbe, asked the Chassidim after the Fabrengen, what did my father Fabring about? The Frierdiker Rebbe got a very kick out of the idea that his father was a young man of 23, 24 years old, and Yidden with white beards would stand in front of him be'ema v'fachad. He thought that was cool. Forgive me for using these ages. He was so proud of his father, you know. My father, everybody listens to my father, and he was what to listen to, yeah? So after the Fabrengen, the Frierdiker Rebbe asked some of the Chassidim, who of course, everybody wanted to talk to the Rebbe Zun, it was the Rebbe Ben Yochid, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe asked him, so what did my father Fabring about? So he said, your father verbringt about was is a chassid. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, and me, I heard this from my father 6 months ago. You just learned what a chassid is now. But I know what a chassid is, because 6 months ago my father told me what a chassid is. So one of the chassidim said to the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, Dira de Tate gesagt, was a chassidl is. Your father taught you what a chassidl, with a lamed, a little chassid. He says, us, your father told was a chassid is. And the Frierdiker Rebbe tells this story, just like I'm telling it to you, the whole steeper. So he can't be a big chassid, be a kleiner chassid, but a chassid. A chassid with a munah, a chassid with simcha, a chassid with a little bit, Yetzias Mitzrayim, a little bit beyond his limitations. But the Tanya works because the Tanya doesn't lie. It speaks to the Nefesh HaBahamis. There's a famous Hasidic word. It's a very, very famous Hasidic word. But I once had an occasion to sit with a Yid who was much older than I. When I was a young upstart, when I first started teaching Chassidus, so Rabbi Bukat Alav Shalom was still alive, and he worked at Cheva Beit Torah in Lubavitch Yeshiva. And we had opportunity. He taught Nigla, I taught Chassidus, but we had many opportunities to cross paths. And he used to fabrengen. Rabbi Bukat had a special chush in fabrengen. He really did. Rabbi Bukat had a chush in fabrengen. He once told me, at the Frierdiker Rebbe hat gesagt, Chayamaya can zugen a pnimis chsidish vod. That's exactly how he put it. But the Frierdiker Rebbe said about a certain situation, his name was Chayamir. Chayamaya can zugen a pnimis chsidish vod. Rabbi Bukat had a chush to say something in a very very deep way. Pnimis dik way. He was a special fabrenger. His fabrengens had he was creative. He had a certain gelevidigkeit. And he was a Chassidish Yid, he was a serious Jew. So he once told me a different nusach of the story, and I'm going to share with you his nusach, because I like his nusach better than the standard nusach, so that's how it goes, yeah. What's the nusach that he said? That when the Tanya had to be printed, they had to go through a censorship. Censura. Russia had serious censorship. Now, if you're familiar with the history of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, you know that there were forces, especially amongst reformer Jews, modern Jews, to outlaw Sorim of Pnimius HaTorah, that the Russian government, that the censorship should automatically disqualify from publication any sefer that do with Pnimius HaTorah, with Kabbalah and with Chassidus, Zohar and so on. And I think it's not too much of a presumption to understand why, because they understood that they wanted to recreate the Jewish people as intellectuals, as enlightened, and they knew that their number one enemy is the godliness, is the Amunah Pshuta, is the higher than reason, which you have in Seder Sateidah, Pnimis Sateidah, in Zohar, in Sifrei Kabbalah, and in Sifrei Chassidus. And there was a big war about it. I've told you many times the Maaseh that during the Vikuach that they had in 1943, in Tafresh Gimel, the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek walked up to Bezalel Stern, who represented the reform at that meeting, and he said to him, Bocha Rebbe ve'omer, Yesh Keinei Lomi B'Shah Achas. The Gemara says about the Balza ben Dodaya, there was a Rosh Gomer, and he did tshuva. He died doing tshuva, and when he died, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the one who wrote the Mishnah, said, Yesh Keinei Lomi B'Shah Achas. There's an individual who can be Keinei Elam Haba in 1 hour. Yesh Keinei Lomi B'Shah Achas. So the Tzemach said to him, Tzal you can be Keinei Elam Haba in 1 hour. Shtim mit uns. On the question of outlawing the publishing of Sifrei Pnimis HaTorah, vote with us. Because it always was 2 against 2 and 1 abstention. It was the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek and the Bitcher Levelozhin. And the other side you had the Goyish representative and Bezalel Stern. The 5th guy was a businessman, helper, and he wanted to stay out of the whole business. He didn't want to get in trouble. The business community is interested in religion. So whenever it was 2 against 2, the government automatically had the tiebreaker, which was heartbreaking. So they came to the meeting, and Bezalel Stern voted with them on that issue. There was 3 against 1, that they should not outlaw the study of Pnimis HaTorah. Any case, so getting back to the story, this is how Rabbi Bukat told the story, that the Tanya was sent to the censor in Vilna. Right? I was a little boy, I used to read, through the oversight of a censura, the Akademaya de Vilna. What does an Torah nick about Akademaya? It means the academy, it means the college. I remember, I didn't know what the word meant, but I had one of the biggest problems of my childhood, if I didn't know what a word meant, I tried to figure it out from the environment, because I didn't want to ask, how could I be such an amaretz? But if you look in the old Svarim, every sefer has approved according to the Academy of Vilna. The Tanya was printed in Slavita, the first Tanya, but it was approved by the censor in Vilna. So the story is, it's something with a guy. But he not only knew Hebrew, he was a big Talmud Chacham. He was a big lamb, yeah, and he had a very good understanding of Torah, and he was able to claim Zechvanande if anything is anti-Christian. He didn't care about Chassidim and Misnagdim. He cared about Christianity. It was the official state religion was Catholicism, but the Eastern Church that they had, and he wanted to make sure that nothing was offensive. And they used to, when they didn't print it Sifrei Torah, they would modify, they would prepare Shinuye Nuschois for the censor. Like when the Alter Rebbe gave the Tanya to the censor to examine, every time it says Odel or Goy, he wrote Akum, which means pagan. That if the censor would say you're insulting Goyim, your priest says, no, we're not talking about Goyim, we're talking about pagans. And if you've ever seen old Sfarim, the inside of the cover of the Sefer has a disclaimer. That whenever it says in this Sefer that Goyim, in a derogatory way, we're not talking about the Goyim who are alive today. We mean the pagans, the ancient world. But the Goyim today, they're just so wonderful. They were such anti-Semites. But you couldn't say it. Why? Because they controlled the printing press. They were such an Ishayim. Don't kid yourself for 1 second. But you open up every Sefer that's printed in the 18th century. In the 19th century, you all have this disclaimer. Yeah? So you have to anticipate what the censor's not going to like and fix it. Because if you gave something to the censor which he didn't like, you didn't get a second chance. The Sefer is not good and finished. So the Alter Rebbe himself, whoever it was, had to anticipate what the censor wouldn't like and write in the corrections. The censor got the Tanya and he read it and he approved it. It was printed. So they came to the censor, Agoy, and they said to the censor, what did you see in this? Why did you approve it? It's a Sefer of mysticism, a Sefer of Chassidus. It's a new kind of Judaism. The Mistagdim are trying to claim that it's a different religion, Rahman al-Islam. This was the issue. They wanted to make us into two nations. They wanted to say that Chassidim are another people, Rahman al-Islam. So the guy said, the Tanya tarogunum in dem Nar from Welt. This is an old Chassidish word, but from Rabbi Bukat I heard that the source of it was a goy, which is incredible. It tells you how understanding this man was, how bright he was. The Tanya removed the nar from the word. We translate the word nar as fool. But the literal translation of the word nar is child. What is the reality of children? How do children think and live? I remember being a child. I thought I was the axis of the universe. Bishvili, my children, Bishvili, Nivra Ha'elam is literal and actual. Everything that exists is supporting me. My father was created to give me this. My mother was created to give me this. My sister was created to give me this. My brother was created to give me this. My school teacher, everybody is serving me. It takes a while to figure out that everybody has the same universe. Bishvili, Nivra Ha'elam. So how do you cohabit? How do you coexist in a universe where everybody's the center of the universe? And the teretz is, we're not the center of the universe. We're a piece of the world, and we have a role to play. And no one can take away my piece. But you're not, the world doesn't revolve around you. You understand? When people, they say a magid will never do tshuva. They say a magid will never do tshuva. Why? Because the minute he hears a word of Musar, he plans how he's going to put it into his next speech and tell it to somebody else. People have a subjectivity in their basic nature. Subjectivity means you see your reality based on what you are. And we're very forgiving of ourselves. We like ourselves very, very much. And therefore, the faults we have are not so terrible. It's the other fault, or the other person's fault. So when you observe the world from a child's perspective, you're not seeing the world honestly, you're seeing the world through your prism. And there's a famous story that the Rebbe Rayatz, the Friedrich Rebbe, was at a Fabrengen. And one of the Chassidim was very passionately describing his father, the Rebbe Nishmas HaYedin, the Rebbe Rashab. So when he finished this whole speech, the Friedrich Rebbe says, "Das hast du alles ausgemalt im Taten in dein Zier." Everything you just described is not my father. It's my father in your image. In other words, if you would be the Rebbe, that's how you would look. But what my father is, you have no idea. And this is how human beings are. You judge everything based on yourself. So the Goya that had, when you learn the Tanya, you're getting an honest assessment of what a person is without a bias. The person who wrote this book is not including himself in his assessment of people. And because he's really be'emes, not including himself as assessment of people, his assessment of people is precise, accurate. That's why he agreed to have the Tanya published. Tanya ta Rabbi Numen dem nar from Welt. When you learn the Tanya, you're hearing a sefer that says emes. Some people learn the Tanya, they feel like the Alter Rebbe is telling them they're terrible people. The Alter Rebbe is not telling you you're a terrible person. The Alter Rebbe is telling you honestly, like the Lashon of the Yem, wie niedrig me is, wie hoch man kann sich erheben. Chassidus is a göttlicher Verstand. Chassidus is a godly wisdom, godly understanding, that shows a person how low he is and how high he can reach. The Tanya is not telling you you're a Rasha. The Tanya is telling you the truth of life, including the Yetzer Hara. And the Tanya is teaching you how you could slowly become with more integrity, with more emes, with more chassidus, with more service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with more mastery of self, with more freedom, with more of a Mitzrayim Galtonu, with more not being a prisoner to foolish and simple and external and worldly distractions, and so on and so forth. So this is the fourth introduction to the Sefer Tanya Kaddish. Okay? Now just to convince you that this time I taka me, that next week we're going to start the Tanya. We'll start it right now. There's no time, Taka. But I want to start, so this way, the vereinlegen dem Katz zurückneuven is a sach schwere. So I'm probably going to read a couple of words. I'm not going to give you a long drasha. We're not starting from the Shadblat. We're starting from the Hakdama, which is page 6. Give me a long base. After we do the Hakdama, we're going to go back and read the Shadblat. In other words, I'm learning the Tanya a little bit out of order. First we're going to read the introduction. After we do the introduction, we're going to go back and read the title page. The reason I'm doing it in this order, because the introduction explains, number one, why the Tanya was written, and number two, how the Tanya is to be utilized. The Tanya was written because of two reasons. The Alter Rebbe doesn't have time to talk to everybody, but the Alter Rebbe says, I know you well enough to write a sefer that's meant for you. And Chassidim, of course, always said, when the Alter Rebbe said, I know you well enough to write a sefer that's meant for you, he didn't only mean his Chassidim, he meant every Yid who's going to learn the Sefer Tanya Kaddish until Mashiach comes. And then how the Sefer Tanya Kaddish should be used. And in a word, the Sefer Tanya Kaddish does not work without the help of Asei Lecho Arav. The Rebbe calls them Zikenim Shavir, a Mashpia, a Chassidish Shirid, somebody who helps you find Makebi Amadrigosei, find the piece of Tanya which talks to you, and helps you serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu based on the principles of the Sefer Tanya Kaddish. This is the introduction. The title page describes what the Tanya is, Takir. So first we're going to learn the introduction, and then we'll go back to the title page. Let's begin to read. Hagdama Samalaka, this is an introduction of the compiler. V'yigeres hashluch, it's a letter which was sent to Leklolas Anshe Shleimenu Yituv, to the collection of Chassidim, indicating, revealing what the Tanya is about. You must understand that, one quote unquote, one of the worst things that happened to the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim was that the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya. Can you imagine that? The Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe were very unhappy about the Tanya. Why? Because the Tanya took the place of Yechidus. And how could a Sefer take the place of Yechidus? Especially if you're Taka Chassid, and when you go into your Rebbe, it's where Chassid Taka goes into his Rebbe, and the way I described before, how what you meet in the Rebbe's Cheder is you. And the Hayran Adracha that you get from the Rebbe is Taka from the Rebbe, but it's based on what you are and so on. How do you replace it with a Sefer? And this is the first of the two things that the Alter Rebbe addresses. Why he had to write the Tanya. So he begins like this: Aleichem ishim ekre. To you men, people, I call. Shimu elai reitfei tzedek. Listen to me, those who seek righteousness, the truth. Mevakshe avayu, who seek God. Ve'yishma aleichem alekim. And the Eibishter will hear you, will understand you, and so on and so forth. In other words, on a very basic level, the Tanya is speaking to a very interested person. Not to an uninterested person, to a person who says, teach me how I can connect to Atzmas and Musa Sav Baruch Hu. Everybody knows the story because I've told it to you so many times. Rabban Strashela was 14 years old. Rabban Strashela. And he came to the Alter Rebbe. And he went into Yechidus. And he wrote a note. And on the note he wrote a few words. HaNefesh HaShveila Be'emes Eich Yizkarev Ela Ein Seif. Now maybe I have it off by a word. There's more than, the story is printed in more than one place. But a truly lowly soul, how can you approach the Ein Seif? Now maybe I'm not quoting it word for word, but this is the Teichen of what he wrote. So he came with him out in the Rebbe, and you understand yourself, Yechidus by the Alter Rebbe was awesome. The Rebbe sat, and there were candles. It was mamish awesome. And he hands Alter Rebbe the zettel. Alter Alter Rebbe reads the zettel, and Alter Rebbe gets so excited, he stands up, and he walks out of the room. And he goes out to the Cheder, which is called Gan Eden HaTachten, the room adjacent to the Alter Rebbe's Cheder Yechidus, which Chassidim used to call, Alter Rebbe's Chassidim used to call the Gan Eden Elyon, holding the paper. And he says to the people sitting there, and they were the biggest Chassidim, Otes gekommen a Jingo, und gefragt a Shaila, Frage, was keinem von euch ist nicht eingefallen zu fragen. A boy came, and he's asked a question that none of you even thought to ask. How do you get close to the Eibishter? But really, this is what Chassidim wanted. Reit, Feit, Tzedek, Mavak, Shavaya. The Alter Rebbe's Chassidim gave away everything. Life and limb for Chassidus. What was Chassidus giving them? A kesher with Atmas and Hussein, say Baruch Hu. Lemigaru v'atkotten, from the greatest to the smallest. Kol anash the dinasenu, all of Chassidim. From our country is Russia, and as I explained to you in an earlier class, Russia was divided up. Russia was parceled out into a bunch of Rebbes, Guta Yidden, Tzaddikim, who left. They left Russia, they went to Israel. And by default, the Alter Rebbe ended up with all of Russia. Like the Mezritcher Maggid said, Der junge Mann wird amol sein Rove begann reisen. This young man will one day be the Rebbe of all of Russia. Und kach have. Because they meant Levitimsky left, and Ram Kalisky left, and Saul Politsky left, and so on. Okay? And those who are near Russia, each one in his own place should come in peace. The Chayim in life, ad ha'elam forever. Netzach Salavod, Oven Ken Yirach. This is the Alter Rebbe's introduction to the Tanya, and Mitzvah Beli Neder next Sunday we'll learn that Gemara. Okay, good.